Okay, so we're back. Part 2 of this All About You series, where I'm hitting those comments from last week, and let's just jump right into where we left off. All right. Eating Bitter says, I've been thinking about how spoiled the North American, that includes American light, i.e. Canada, martial art culture. I've been thinking about how martial systems in the past were developed out of necessity as a counter to oppression, criminal conduct, and self-protection. I've been thinking about how in North America, there has never been an on-the-ground, in-our-face interruption to the community to force teachers and students to have to stop or train in secret. Enter COVID-19. Been thinking about how many lives and family are suffering because their base needs are tied to the economic peddling of the arts to the public. Been thinking about how the strip mall dojo relationships have failed those families. I've been thinking about the lack of community support as a capitalist society we have for those that live sale to sale as small business. Been thinking about how we seem to continually fail to understand that a return to the way it used to be is a pipe dream as long as our community continue to be willfully ignorant of their civic responsibility. Stay home, wear a mask, etc. I've been thinking about how upside down, inside out, and backward things are. Thinking about how the masters of the past dealt with their times of woe. I've been thinking that these days are a time for refinement. Been thinking about how teaching to the smallest of circles, family, friends, and family across the street. I've been thinking too much. I really like where your head's at. You know, it's true. We have to remember that there were reasons why this training came about. I firmly believe in that idea that soft times build soft people and soft people build hard times and hard times build hard people. This is definitely one of the closest times we've had to a hard time recently. And by comparison, it's not very hard to many things historically. But it's closing businesses, it's hurting dojos, things like that. I know that it's been a struggle for us. You know, we certainly don't have that sale to sale thing, and I hope that many places don't, but I know that there are places that do. You know, we do it for the love of the training and the expansion of the art. And we've been fortunate that the fact that these aren't our primary jobs and things like that, we're able to use dues to cover expenses and just keep training, you know, have a place to train. And that certainly has changed. And there's been all kinds of videos. You can go look at my channel to see a bunch of videos about the things that are going on for us personally. But I think a lot of people are going through that. You know, suddenly you've got people who are uncomfortable to train. People who have had financial hardship because of COVID-19 and now maybe can't afford to or what have you. You've got places that have closed down and aren't doing it anymore. You've got people getting sick. All kinds of things are happening. Because of that, especially, I mean, martial arts has just moved to a different place. We're still not driven and motivated by acts of war that we need to go be prepared for because we have bad things happening on our soil that we're responsible for dealing with. And that is a difference, right? There are people, and I've worked with some people who that is part of their situation, and they've got to deal with that. And so their training is focused on how to be ready to execute in a way that I hope I never have to. And that is a big deal. But I don't think we should discount the fact that even though that was maybe the original reason why a lot of these martial arts existed, if you do it for fun because you enjoy it, or you do it just to get up and move around and have some activity in your life to kind of maintain your health, or you do it just to challenge yourself, like there's nothing wrong with those things. Those aren't immoral motivations. And it all depends on the school and the situation as to whether or not that fits. But just because that isn't our situation, I don't think takes away from the fact that the martial arts have a lot to give, even outside of their original intent. But you bring up a lot of good things, and I hope people take time to reread through your comment here to just take a moment to actually think about this stuff, because there's a lot there. You've got a lot on your mind. You say you've been thinking too much. I don't know about too much. I'm glad that you're thinking. I'm glad that these things are on your mind. And maybe, you know, I hope people jump back to the old video and maybe have a conversation with you, toss in their ideas. You know, I'm encouraging you guys, I'm looking at you, any of you, to go jump on that and comment and have a conversation about what you guys feel about this, because there's a lot of good things to talk about here, more than I'm going to be able to just talk about on my own. So go to it. All right, Because Pro. Been thinking about self-defense. I've gone from self-defense focused, primarily Krav, to sports/fun focused, BJJ and MMA, and have never felt happier in my training. All of these irrationally heightened fears of knife attacks and multiple opponents have gone away, not because I suddenly think I can handle them any better than I could before, but because I know how unlikely they are to happen to me given where I live and my general demographic. I felt like when my training was self-defense focused, I was almost hyping myself up for a fight that I would always be hoping to avoid, in the sense that the best win from a self-defense aspect is to give the would-be mugger my wallet and run for the hills as opposed to square up for fisticuffs. Now in BJJ MMA, I've sparred with new guys and I know what it feels like to have an athletic, powerful person without much skill beat you up. I know how I'd do. And similarly, I know that I could just as easily get tuned up by a highly skilled 15-year-old girl if I don't take the threat seriously. I just feel like most self-defense focused classes sell themselves using fear and rely on propagating that fear for retention as well as to make their students feel some air of superiority over styles with other focuses, be it sport or art. Even if those other styles can in some cases better prepare you for violent encounters. I don't know how a self-defense school that isn't just an add-on to a bigger gym can exist and be profitable without playing into this fear-based marketing. Interested in hearing your thoughts. I have many on this. My first thought is it seems like you've made a shift from something that maybe you weren't overly happy with to something that's bringing you joy. And I'm really excited to hear that. Because at the end of the day, the thing you enjoy doing and spend more time doing is the thing that's going to help you the most. And the martial arts is no different. If you enjoy going and you look forward to it and you enjoy practicing, you enjoy rolling and sparring and all that stuff, then you'll get more reps in. You'll get more time on the mat. And because of that, you will get better. If you don't love the other stuff quite as much, you maybe don't spend as much time on the mat and you don't get as much out of it. And that's critical. And I do think there's something to be said about, this idea of where I live in my general demographic. I think a lot of people do forget there are statistics for those areas, and places can be statistically low. Not everything has to be a statistically high, dangerous area. Doesn't mean bad things can't happen in those areas. Don't forget, going back to that whole soft times build soft people, right? If we don't recognize that there are dangers, those places can become vulnerable just by the fact that we don't think anything's going to happen, so we're not necessarily doing anything to stop it from happening. Different things, maybe a different topic, but people need to stay at least aware enough to protect their homes and things like that. And that might just mean, hey, maybe I make sure I change the keys when I change the locks when I get a new place, or I make sure to actually lock my doors at night, or it's easy if I just keep my garage door unlocked, but maybe I just shouldn't do that. There's simple things that don't have to bring in fear into your life, but just help make it more difficult to be a target of somebody who's taking advantage of people in any case. The fear thing is interesting. I think a lot of places do that. Krav is a good example in a weird way because it was a system developed for military. So it was a no-nonsense, not messing around kind of thing, right? Because of that, let's face it, personally, part of why I'm not in the military is because I'm not ready for that mental headspace. Bad things happen. They have to be dealt with. People have to die. And that's the idea of those moral injuries sticking with you and continuing to affect who you are mentally is really hard, and so I don't want that. And so I've strayed away from the idea of Krav Maga on that same vein, because it was developed for military, and people who kind of stick to that line, why it exists and why it's there, are maintaining the parts that made it real for them. That was the part. It was military. It was designed for it. The threats that they want to deal with and approach are threats that will happen, not might happen. And as that moved into a residential world, a civilian world, then those things maybe became significantly less likely, but the tactics in which they're taught hasn't changed. And you saw it. You saw that it was based on those ideas. And it was hard to just constantly have that soaking into you. And I agree. I've done different training with different people, and there's been times when I've trained with people who have to live in that world, and I knew that I had to get out of it because it was changing who I was in my head. It was changing how I saw the world. And I think there are people who need to see the world that way, because there's parts of the world that are that way. And I don't mean parts of the globe, I mean parts of life around you is that way. If you're military, if you're law enforcement, if your people destined to dispatch to those things, that is your life. Even if it's 2 houses down from your life, that's what they have to deal with. And so it's important for them to have that. And I realized as that's not what I do and how my life fits, I didn't want to live in that headspace. It messed me up. It wasn't good. And so I completely understand. Now, that said, I run a self-defense based school, and that's out of my motivation that I believe that the martial arts as I teach them and want to teach them is for civilian self-protection. I don't base it on fear, and so I think it can be done. I incorporate parts of the art and parts of the sport and things like that because I think that there's room for that stuff. Just make sure that I'm not teaching things that are only good at that, right? I don't like teaching sport focus because there are things that you will teach for sport that just aren't effective anywhere else, right? They're playing to the rule set. And if that rule set doesn't apply to your situation, then that technique doesn't apply to your situation. I don't want people, somebody once said to me, you can get really good at something that will get you really dead. And that stuck with me. So rather than focusing on fear, I just focused on culling back the curriculum to include things that are designed to work. They're designed to be functional. We can still have a good time and we can still not have it be constantly fear-based, but make sure that the skill set applies. And then that can kind of ratchet. And as people get further along, maybe introduce more of the seriousness of that, the reality, bring in a little more violence to the execution of the technique. As the person forcing you to use your technique. I use knives as a good example. There are a lot of things you can do with knives, a lot of different ways you can do stuff. But the first time you grab a hold of the back of someone's neck and you just start railing into them, it switches their head, right? They need to understand the reality of what that's like. Doesn't mean they're going to be in that situation. They just need to know that a lot of this fancy stuff that people do with knives is not how knives get used very often. So what do you do when this situation looks real? And it's just railing at you like a sewing machine, But that doesn't have to be day one. And it doesn't have to be a constant focus of, if you go into any alley in the world, you're going to get raped, or something like that. Like, it doesn't need to be based that way. It just needs to be a constant reinforcement that your skills work. A escalation of resistance that allows you to build a trust and confidence in your skill set. And then let the individual choose how much they believe that the fear component is necessary to research and understand. I hint at it, I talk about it, but I don't talk about it from a scary perspective. I don't tell people this will happen to you or when this happens to you. I just say things more along the lines of like, in this type of situation, it's very realistic that it could happen in this way. And that's enough, in my opinion. That's enough to get the wheels turning. If people want to take that, and I have people that do, students that go and look at videos of real life altercations and things to see what that looks like. And I've got people that have no interest in that. And instead I leave that up to them. So I think it can be done. I think it's possible to have a self-defense focus in your school without having it be based strictly on fear, and certainly not, there's no part of my component and the fact that my dojo continues to function and thrive is not based on the fact that I use fear to leverage people's wallets open. I don't do that and never will do that. I don't believe in it. But we continue to be open and people continue to want to train. So I think it can be done. Lastly, John Deathlefs, and this was actually on Facebook, and I asked him, and I'm really, thank you, John, for posting this on the YouTube, so I didn't miss this one. His comment is, what weapons should we use for modern kobudo? And secondly, how do we create new kata for firearms? This one was really good. I just liked the concept of this, because these are categories that are important to me, that I think about. These are things that have been on my mind. So when it comes to what weapons should we use for modern kobudo? Firstly, I don't necessarily think you have to get rid of the old weapons. Here's a thing that maybe is not a popular opinion, but it's how I view kobudo. I've got a fairly extensive kobudo history with many kata and many weapons. The way that I view that, though, is instead of thinking of it as the actual weapon, and a lot of people do that. They come into kobudo and they go, okay, but when am I going to have a sai with me? When am I going to have nunchaku with me? And they're not wrong in their thinking. I just think they're forgetting something, which is that if you look at it appropriately, you can start to base them off of weapon categories, okay? The bo, the jo, the hanbo, and the tambo are all leverage bludgeoning-based weapons, right? They are impact tools of different lengths, and the availability of them is based on that length. When it's really short, I don't get to do as much two-handed stuff as when it's really long, and so I get a lot of different ways to practice, different ways of using those tools based on their size, but their function of defending through blocking as a barrier and striking as an impact tool doesn't change. The nunchaku, the rope, and we use belts or stuff like that too. The monriki, the chain, all of those fit into the category of flexible weapons. And so how they get executed and the things you can do with them don't really change. And we do that a lot. We'll use nunchaku, we'll go through all that stuff, and then we'll look at how it applies to just like a belt or any piece of rope or anything like that. And so categorically, it's a flexible weapon and it functions with flexible attributes. So when you start looking at it that way, I may never carry a nunchaku, but that doesn't mean that I won't have something in my environment that fits a flexible category, and so its function will be in a flexible manner. Or even carrying, like I said, a belt's a good example. The nunchaku part of it is an impact tool because you're swinging something like that. I consider it the first foldable stick in a way, right? But a belt is still a good example of that because it's still flexible, and if you've got any kind of heft to that belt buckle, then when you swing that thing, then you can still apply that impact or possibly even laceration based off of that. But the way it behaves is going to come right back into what you can expect from a flexible weapon. When you work blade-based things, knife, machete, sword, etc., you're learning slashing and piercing. And so that's a relative thing. Some of the weapon categories include things like projectiles and stuff like that. So when you look at it categorically, the skills translate. So if you get stuck on the tool itself being exactly what it is, then it's no good for you. But if you look at it for how the skill set translates to different types of tools, especially improvised, environmentally available tools, then I think that it's still very, very valid. You could choose to train with those exact tools, right? You could go get a plunger handle and a broomstick and whatever you want to do and train with that kind of stuff. That's up to you. I think there's value in, I train with a heavy white oak bow. That doesn't mean that I'm going to have a nice heavy staff with me wherever I go. It just means that I've used both that impact training of the long weapon and incorporated a strength training of it being a heavy weapon. So now when I pick up something light, broomsticks are very light. I've also developed musculature that is good at wielding that weapon well and generating force into it. And I know how it should expect if it is heavy. If I'm picking up a piece of pipe, I'm not going to be thrown off because I've only ever used a carbon fiber graphite bow for competition. I'm going to have dealt with something heavy and I can execute that. If you want to go the direction of modern tools, then I believe personally, the first place to start is categories. You've got impact weapons, you've got slashing weapons, you've got thrusting weapons, you've got flexible weapons, you've got projectile weapons, and you've got disruption weapons, right? Good example, pepper spray, OC spray, things like that. Or bright light, flashlights, anything that's going to disrupt somebody's senses where you might not hit them with it, right? Like I can have a flashlight and most tools are going to cross categories. So a flashlight's a really good example. That is a bludgeoning weapon. Depending on how that front of that tip is, it might be a lacerating weapon, but it's got that disruption of a bright light or a strobing light. And so when you use that tool, when I'm far enough away to just blast you with light and then run away, then there's no impact. There's nothing like that. So it doesn't fit the other categories. But when I'm close enough to start hitting you with it, then it fits in the Uwara category or things like that. So I think it's important to look at it categorically. How do I get good at using an impact weapon? How do I get good at using a slashing weapon? How do I get good at using a thrusting weapon, a flexible weapon, a disruptive weapon, or a projectile weapon? And build those skill sets. Where you are in the world and what your tools are and what your day-to-day life is like will define what those tools make sense to be. For me, my favorite set of tools that I think everybody should carry all the time is a pocket knife, a flashlight, and a pen. And I ask people, why do you think that those are the right tools to carry? And I get a variety of answers, and usually their wheels are turning towards what you could do violently with that. And then I remind them, I might need to cut something open. I might need to see something in the dark, and I might need to write something down. A tool that you carry to use all the time for regular things is going to build a reflex and a habit that's easy to get to. So the hardest part of any weapon is getting to it. So if I train and I carry a pen right here, right? And we've all done it. If somebody says, hey, do you have a pen? And you do carry one all the time, half the time it's in your hand before you've ever even thought about, where's my pen? It's already, you've grabbed it and said, hey, I got my pen. Well, if I've trained 100 times a day, grabbing my pen off of my collared shirt, then in that situation that I suddenly need to stab somebody with a pen because I need to create some space so I can run away or whatever, then I have all of the practice in the world all day, every day. It's way better. I don't believe in carrying a tool that's only used. A firearm's an exception because it is its own ballistic thing, right? It falls into that projectile ballistic category, but you don't have any day-to-day use for that type of thing. Hopefully. I don't know. Depends on your life, I guess. But so I don't believe in carrying a knife that's specifically just for defending my life and then carrying a different knife for opening boxes and stuff. Because if I do that and I go off of gross motor, off of habit, which knife is going to end up in my hand out of habit? It's not going to be the one that's razor sharp and has never been opened, ready to slice someone open to save my life. It's going to be the one that I grab all day, every day for every little task. So I might as well make sure those are the same knife. And then I maybe pick one with a good steel that can handle that day-to-day wear without getting too dull, and then maintain it. Maintain your tools. Keep good batteries in your flashlights and make sure, your knife is sharp. Those are just choices of maintenance. Add to that just the idea of choosing where you carry them. I tend to keep things on my center line as close as I can so I can reach them with right or left, and then base that placement off of things like that because they just change my opportunities. And I factor in what those opportunities look like for me. So then I can try to be as consistent as possible and have that operate. Now, I don't have to go pull out a flashlight in the dojo to train. I can grab a little piece of wood and train Uwara training and different things like that, and all of those skills will translate. So because it's categorical, as long as it fits the category of the weapon and you're training something that uses the tools that are in your environment or on your person, I think that's modern kobudo. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts. Lastly, how do we create kata for firearms? One, I think we kind of already have that a little bit. Because when you look at kata are a set of skills memorized and retained and practiced through solo practice. When I say it like that, it should not be surprising that your dry fire drills, your reload drills, your stoppage drills, things like that you practice, your presentation drills, your drawing and holstering and all that kind of stuff, those are your katas. When you look at katana, for example, the sword, a lot of people don't realize those katas are like 3-4 moves, sometimes only 2, Not every kata is 15 moves long. And so those individual skills are our firearms kata. I'll continue to use the sword because I think it's a good analogy. If you train with the sword, then you also do cutting. You do tamashigiri and you do your cutting. Well, that's no different than getting on the range and practicing the execution of your firearm, firing the firearm and doing that, right? You're using its live application realistically. And depending on your training, that could be standing on the range and just trying to be accurate, or that could be working dynamic drills that you are working with a professional on to develop dynamic firearm skills. But those are your kata. Sometimes kata is just individual skills strung together, right? So you take, I think it's important that I know how to present my weapon. I think it's important that I know how to clear my cover garment. I think it's important that I know how to aim and pull the trigger and focus on that trigger pull. I think it's important that I know how to reload the weapon. I think it's important that I know how to handle a stoppage. Okay, so that set of things, well, maybe those things, one after the other, is a kata. It could be practiced that way. You can go, I go through this series and I run through this whole thing. And maybe you have a handful of those. So I think the idea of kata, it exists. It's just a tool. Kata is a tool to allow you to become more skillful at the thing that you're trying to do. And that's what these drills do. And so when you practice clearing your cover garment, drawing, getting a sight picture, and then practicing your trigger pull, that's one whole kata. Right? And if you include checking the area around you and then holstering when you're ready with intent, that's one whole kata that does not look very different than presenting your sword, getting that sword drawn, making your cut, follow-up cut, clearing the area, and then putting your sword away. It's not really different, right? So maybe we already have some of these things. It's just how we look at them. But I think it's very worth mentioning. And I had a really great conversation with a really good friend of mine. And if you want to see a video of him and I shooting, you can go right here. But we talked about this particular topic after you had posted that. And I kind of told him some of my thoughts. And then we agreed. He brought up some really good points, and we agreed on these points that having a good firearms kata does not pass all of the rest of the knowledge. Just like having a good sword kata does not pass all of the knowledge of how to be a morally responsible and ethical person, how to handle the environment, right? If you pull that trigger, you're responsible for where that bullet goes, including things that establish the situation and pay attention to what options are around and who might get hit if that person moves or you miss or what have you. Understanding the ramifications, mental and legal, of utilizing your firearm. All of that stuff needs to be contained. So while you have your firearms kata, as I feel that they are, you also should have your firearms art, which includes all of the ethical character components and the added situational awareness and understanding of how this stuff gets deployed and when and why and all of that stuff has to be a part of it. Otherwise, you're just a guy who's really good at using a tool but has no idea why, when, or how to do so. So those are my thoughts on that, and I hope that that's helpful. I hope that any of you that left comments that I've talked about today, that you drop comments in this video to let me know what your thoughts were on what I had to say. And please, if you weren't one of those people, drop some comments anyway. Let's continue this going. I kind of like this, and maybe we continue this as a series. We do this periodically where if you're dropping comments, maybe I just occasionally will release videos talking about what you had to say, or maybe ending a video with a couple comments from the last one or something. So that's it for today. Really cool conversations. I really like what we're talking about, and I like hearing where people's heads are at. So I do really like when you comment and let me know where things are at for you and what's going on. And what's going on with your training and what's going on in your head. I think that's really great. So please continue to do it. While you go down there, if you liked this, if it had value to you, hit that like. If you think that other people could get value out of it, share it, put it out there. And let's expand our network of people having these conversations. That means a lot to me, the fact that we can continue to build. I mean, big news in this last area, right before making this video, we hit 1,000 subscribers. There are 1,000 people who want to hear what I have to say, or at least passingly are interested in what I have to say. And that is mind-blowing and incredible, and I love it. And the more of you there are, I notice there's more comments and more interaction, and building these conversations in this community has been really, really cool, and I hope that continues. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for being here. If you're new, thank you for jumping on. If you've been here forever, thank you for doing that ages ago and sticking it out. I think that's really cool, and I hope that we can continue to do that. So share it out. Let's get more people in here. Let's keep it going. If you're not subscribed and you do want to see it, and statistics show that most of you watching this are not subscribed, you can hit that right here and go ahead and jump on and see when the next videos are coming. Make sure to hit that bell. Also got a playlist of videos like this here and a couple videos that you might like right here, and I hope to see you in the next one.